Even if you don't know his name, chances are you've seen Richard Jaeckel. He was a constant presence in classic war films, westerns, police procedurals, and beach set dramas. He wasn't the leading man or a household name, but he had something more important: credibility. For over half a century, he helped shape the rugged image of American masculinity on screen. But over time, without any scandal or disgrace, Jaeckel slipped quietly into obscurity, forgotten by the very industry he helped build. Jaeckel never craved fame. He didn't walk red carpets seeking attention. He crouched in the trenches of fictional wars, delivered hard truths as gruff sergeants, or served as the reliable sidekick with a strong moral compass. From his breakthrough in Guadalcanal Diary to standout roles in The Dirty Dozen, and sometimes A Great Notion, he committed fully to every performance. His dedication earned him respect and even an Academy Award nomination. Yet he never ascended to leading man status, not because he lacked the talent, but because Hollywood had no intention of elevating someone so understated. He appeared in over 150 productions throughout his career, pouring himself into the work. Jaeckel didn't seek out celebrity gossip columns or cultivate a flashy image. He focused on craft, not careerism. Eventually, that refusal to play the game meant Hollywood moved on without him. His decline wasn't dramatic. It was worse. It was invisible. For decades, he worked relentlessly, appearing in more than 150 film and television productions. His was a life devoted to the craft, not the fame. He did not play the game. He did not chase headlines. And eventually, Hollywood turned its back, not with a scandal or a fall from grace, but by simply moving on without him. And when his time came, there were no parades, no primetime tributes, just a whisper, a quiet goodbye to a man who helped build the very foundation of classic American cinema. What happened to Richard Jaeckel in his final years is not just surprising, it is heartbreaking. Because this is not a story of failure. It is a story of quiet devotion and cruel neglect. But that was only the beginning, because what came next would shake even the most loyal fans. When the end came, there were no grand tributes or headline obituaries, just a soft, overlooked farewell. This is not a tale of career collapse. It's a story of quiet greatness and institutional neglect. And the most painful chapters were still ahead. Richard Jaeckel was never groomed for stardom. Born in 1926 in Long Beach, New York, he relocated to Los Angeles as a boy. He didn't dream of acting. Instead, he worked as a mail clerk at 20th Century Fox. His big break came by chance when, at age 17, he was offered a role in the wartime drama Guadalcanal Diary. It launched a career that would last 5 decades. From the beginning, Jaeckel stood apart. He brought an authenticity that couldn't be faked. Whether portraying battle-hardened soldiers or men of quiet strength, he gave every role a grounded believability. Audiences and critics alike noticed his intensity and realism. He wasn't flashy, but he made every moment count. Off-screen, Jaeckel was known for being modest, dependable, and gracious. He didn't demand special treatment. He treated everyone, from directors to assistants, with the same level of courtesy. He arrived on time, knew his lines, and delivered his performances without ego. But behind the steely on-screen presence was a man who was surprisingly gentle, kind, and deeply loyal. Those who worked with him described him as quiet, humble, and professional. He never tried to steal the spotlight, and he never acted like he was better than anyone else. On set, he showed up on time, hit his marks, and treated everyone with respect, from directors to production assistants. Yet that humility may have worked against him in a town that rewards the bold and the boastful. While his peers chased magazine covers and lucrative contracts, Jaeckel was simply happy to work. He loved acting for what it was, not a path to stardom, but a craft worth mastering, and it showed. In every role, whether he was playing a hardened soldier or a small-town cop, there was always something more going on beneath the surface. Still, even with a strong body of work and the respect of his peers, the spotlight always seemed to dance just out of reach. It was as if Hollywood could never quite figure out what to do with a man who was both a tough guy and a tender soul. This humility, however, may have been a disadvantage. In a town that rewards self-promotion, Jaeckel's quiet professionalism left him overlooked. While other actors maneuvered for fame, he stayed focused on the work. Every character he played, no matter how small, had layers. His roles weren't larger than life, but they were always lived in and real. Despite a growing list of credits and the admiration of his peers, Jaeckel remained on the margins of fame. He was the kind of performer who improved everything around him, yet Hollywood didn't quite know what to do with him. But even as the spotlight passed him by, Jaeckel kept going, and his greatest battles, on and off screen, were still ahead. By the 1960s, Richard Jaeckel was a name known to industry insiders. He was not headlining films, but he had developed a sterling reputation as a go-to supporting actor. His breakout moment came in 1967 with The Dirty Dozen, a landmark war film packed with stars. Despite the competition, Jaeckel held his own. His performance was subtle but powerful, exactly what audiences had come to expect from him. In 1971, he delivered perhaps his most emotionally charged performance in Sometimes a Great Notion. His portrayal of a troubled logger earned him an Oscar nomination for Best Supporting Actor. It should have opened doors, ushered in more prominent roles, and elevated his career. But instead, the offers stayed modest. Hollywood appreciated Jaeckel, but didn't promote him. It was a harsh reality. Jaeckel had done everything right. He had paid his dues, shown his range, and delivered award-worthy work. Yet the industry never positioned him for stardom. Flashier, more marketable actors leapfrogged ahead. And as the 1970s ended and cinema shifted toward blockbuster spectacle, Jaeckel's brand of understated realism was less in demand. Still, he kept working. He never stopped grinding, never stopped trying. But the emotional cost was real. Those close to him noted his quiet frustration. He had proven himself over and over again, and still found himself relegated to the background. It was a brutal reminder of how Hollywood treated actors like Jaeckel, valued for their grit, but rarely celebrated. For all his hard work, for all his talent, the system never quite knew how to reward him. And as newer, flashier faces filled the screens, his quiet strength began to be overlooked. Behind the scenes, that took a toll. Jaeckel was not one to complain. He was a working man, through and through. But those close to him said there were moments of frustration. He watched as others with less talent but more charm rose to the top. He saw the industry shift away from the character-driven stories he loved to effects-driven blockbusters. And through it all, he kept showing up, doing the work, no matter how small the role or how far he had fallen from center stage. The battle off-screen was just as intense as the ones he fought on camera. It was the battle for relevance, for respect, and for purpose. And although he rarely showed it, those battles left scars. Scars that would deepen as he entered the next phase of his career, a phase filled with perseverance, but also quiet heartbreak. It was a quiet battle, but it hurt all the same. Richard Jaeckel worked continuously for decades. While others took breaks or retired early, he never paused. Film after film, television appearance after television appearance. His career was a marathon of consistency. Over 150 credits stacked up over the years, each one a testament to his tenacity. During the 1980s and early 1990s, he became a familiar presence on TV. Guest appearances on Baywatch, The A-Team, and Spencer, For Hire, kept him in front of audiences. Even when his roles were minor, he delivered memorable performances. He was the definition of dependable. Then in the early 1990s, something changed. The sharpness in his eyes began to dull. He started missing calls, forgetting lines, losing weight. At first it was subtle, but those around him began to worry. By 1994, he was officially diagnosed with terminal cancer. And with that diagnosis came the cruelest twist of all. He could no longer work. For a man whose identity had always been tied to his craft, stepping away from acting felt like a slow-motion collapse. There was no farewell tour, no magazine covers or final teary-eyed interviews. His exit from the industry was as quiet as his entry had been. One day he was a familiar face on screen. The next, he was gone. For a man who had lived to work, being forced to stop was almost unbearable. He was no longer strong enough to act. He had always defined himself through his craft. Without it, he seemed to lose his sense of self. There was no farewell special, no final role written to honor his legacy. He simply disappeared, and Hollywood predictably moved on. As Richard Jaeckel's health deteriorated, his financial situation became a crisis. Despite decades of steady work, he was not wealthy. Acting had paid the bills, but it had not built a fortune. When medical expenses mounted, he was forced to move into a care facility run by the Motion Picture and Television Fund. There were no media campaigns to raise money. No major studios stepped up to assist. It was a grim reflection of the industry's selective memory. Even as he battled cancer, the actor who had given everything to Hollywood received little in return. But outside the gates of the industry, there was warmth. Fans who had grown up watching him sent letters and donations. Old colleagues reached out privately to help. It wasn't a media frenzy. It was personal. Small gestures that proved his work had mattered. There were no red carpet fundraisers, no public statements from major studios. Just silence. The same silence that had followed him as his roles shrank and his name slipped from the public eye. It was a bitter reminder that in Hollywood, loyalty does not guarantee legacy, and working-class actors, no matter how prolific, are rarely remembered when the spotlight fades. But Jaeckel's story did not end in total darkness. When fans and former colleagues heard what was happening, many were stunned. A grassroots wave of support began to rise. Donations trickled in, not millions, but enough to make a difference. Actors he had worked with decades earlier quietly chipped in. Friends reached out. Viewers who had grown up watching him in westerns and war epics sent letters of support. It was not the grand Hollywood ending he deserved, but it was something real. A reminder that while the industry had turned away, the people had not. And yet the silence surrounding his final chapter remained deeply unsettling. For a man who had meant so much to so many productions, his fading from memory was a cruel twist. Richard Jaeckel died on June 14, 1997, in Woodland Hills, California. He was 70 years old. His passing was quiet, almost unnoticed. A few trade publications noted his death. Mainstream media barely acknowledged it. No retrospectives, no televised tributes. For someone with more than 150 roles to his name, it felt like a deliberate erasure. His sons, Barry and Richard Jr., remembered him as a steady, loving father. He didn't speak much about the lack of recognition. He had made peace with it, and even as the industry turned its back, his family and fans held him close. It was not just his death that was quiet, it was the decades leading up to it. There were no scandals, no Hollywood meltdowns, no attention-grabbing interviews. Just consistent, disciplined work. The kind of work that kept the wheels of cinema turning. The kind that rarely gets celebrated, but always matters. Some of the actors who had once shared scenes with him went on to win multiple awards, land multi-million-dollar deals, and enjoy legacy status. Meanwhile, Jaeckel left this world without a mansion, without a fortune, and without the full credit he deserved. He had been the unsung backbone of countless productions, always delivering, never demanding. And in the end, it was that quiet dignity that defined him more than any headline ever could. His life had not ended in disgrace or controversy, but in something perhaps even harder to swallow: obscurity. And for a man who had given everything to his craft, that obscurity felt almost cruel. While other actors received posthumous celebrations, Jaeckel was buried with little fanfare. No documentaries were released. No reissues of his most iconic films appeared. His absence was a quiet void, but that quiet didn't erase his value. If anything, it highlighted the flaws in a system that prioritizes fame over contribution. Richard Jaeckel's story isn't one of failure, it's one of endurance, of talent that was overlooked not because it lacked quality, but because it lacked spectacle. He never courted the limelight, but he illuminated every scene he entered. Without him, many of Hollywood's classics would have lacked the emotional heft they needed. He didn't win Lifetime Achievement Awards. He wasn't inducted into halls of fame, but he mattered to his peers, to his audiences, to the stories he told. Hollywood often remembers those who shine the brightest, but it rarely honors those who carry the weight behind the scenes. Jaeckel was one of those quiet forces, and though the industry forgot him, time has not. His story raises a hard question. Why do some actors get immortalized, while others vanish into footnotes? Richard Jaeckel gave 5 decades of his life to the screen. He delivered Oscar-nominated performances. He stood shoulder to shoulder with icons. He earned the respect of his peers, his directors, and his audiences. And yet in the end, his name was missing from most of the tributes. There were no major awards celebrating his lifetime of work, no re-releases of his best films, just a slow, quiet fade into memory. But for those who watched him work, for the fans who remember the intensity in his eyes, the honesty in his performances, and the strength he brought to every scene, Richard Jaeckel was unforgettable. And more than that, he was a reminder that greatness in Hollywood is not always about headlines or ticket sales. Sometimes it is about consistency, commitment, integrity. Jaeckel may have died without riches, without accolades, and without widespread fame, but he left behind something far more enduring. A body of work that continues to speak for itself, and a legacy that, while too often ignored, remains etched into the foundation of American film history. So if you find yourself flipping through channels and you see him, maybe in uniform, maybe on horseback, maybe staring down danger with that quiet intensity, pause for a moment, because that man, the one whose name you might not know, was one of the finest to ever do it. So the next time you stumble on a war movie, or a gritty Western, or an old crime show, and you see that familiar face, take a moment. Remember the man who was always there, always excellent, and never fully appreciated. Because Richard Jaeckel deserved more. And now maybe he'll finally get it.